Hello, everyone. It's great to virtually see you all today. We have a very large audience of people signing up for this webinar. We're very excited. My name is Rafe Sonenshein. I'm the Executive Director of the Pat Brown Institute for Public Affairs at Cal State LA, and our mission is unleashing the power of participation. And I can think of no better way to do that than to have us have a chance to chat with two of the principal people that you'll find in the community who are helping us make our voices heard on November 8th and in the counting that goes beyond. Just to let you know how this will go, there's a Q&A function, and feel free to put your questions in there. We'll get to some. We may not get to all of them, but I have a whole series of questions for both of these folks that I'm about to introduce you to. At least I'll introduce you to the first one. The first person I'm going to introduce is LA County's Registrar-Recorder, who runs our elections, who's Dean Logan. Hello, Dean.
Good morning, or good afternoon, I guess.
Well, good afternoon by a little bit. We're going to talk for about 40 minutes. And after that, I'm going to introduce a colleague of ours, Dr. Ninotchka McTaggart, who's the Executive Director of the Los Angeles League of Women Voters, longtime partner of ours, who's going to talk about what the League is doing, especially to reach out to young voters. And we're very happy about how many young people we have on this webinar. And we want to make sure that some of the information you get is really useful to you. So let's just jump right in, because this is going to be a conversation. It's not particularly scripted. We're just going to try to learn as much as we can from these two outstanding civic leaders here in Los Angeles. So Dean, let me just start asking you a couple of questions.
Sure.
Where are you from, and how did you end up as LA County's Registrar-Recorder? And what is this job anyway?
Well, first, just let me thank you and the Institute for having the webinar today. It's these are great opportunities to have a good dialogue and answer questions, so really appreciate that. Yeah, so I actually came to Los Angeles about a little over 16 years ago. I'm originally from the state of Washington, where I was born and raised, and I kind of cut my teeth in local government in a mid-sized county in Washington state, and started working as a temporary in the elections office right out of high school, and then proceeded through a number of different elements of my career and my education, but I always found myself drawn back into election administration. And so in Washington state, I served as the elections director in the Secretary of State's office for a period of time. And then just prior to coming to LA was the director of records, elections, and licensing services in King County, which is the largest county in Washington state. And then, as I said, about 16 years ago, was lured down here, and I have been here ever since.
So just so people know, we hear a lot about secretaries of state being elected by the voters to run elections, but you're not elected, you're appointed. Is that?
That's correct.
That process?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm an appointed department director within Los Angeles County government. So I'm appointed and serve at the pleasure of the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors. But then, of course, I also have state constitutionally defined duties and duties defined in the elections code that are specific to the roles that I play as the registrar of voters.
So that's an important point. If you saw something that's required under the state elections code, regardless of whether the supervisors maybe are mad at you that day, you still have to carry out the election code.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, a large portion of the work that I do is regulated by state law. So we function at the local government level, and we provide services at the local government level, but our kind of regulatory authority and framework comes through the state elections code. There are some exceptions to that. There are some things that kind of filter down to the local level, but for the most part, we're governed by state law, and state law does give certain responsibilities, for instance, certifying election results and the like, to the registrar of voters, specifically in state law.
So what elections do you run? I know you run county elections, but right now, what other types of elections are you running right now going into next week?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually been a change in Los Angeles County. So when I first came to Los Angeles County, a number of our 88 cities still ran their own elections. They had individual election departments, or they contracted out to third parties to conduct their municipal elections. And even those that we conducted here in the registrar's office were typically conducted during the odd numbered years. So there was a separation of those municipal and local elections than there was from statewide elections and federal elections. However, that has changed in recent years. Now, for the most part, all of those local districts, cities, municipalities are now consolidated and run their elections in tandem with the statewide election cycle. So, for instance, this is the first year that we have had a mayoral election in the city of LA, for example, that has been on the even year ballot, same time as the governor and our members of Congress, our members of the legislature. That used to be an odd year election that took place in the March, April, May timeframe. But now that is consolidated, and as a result, our office is serving as the election administrator for the vast majority of all local, state, and federal elections that take place in LA County.
Good. And we're expecting a very big turnout in Los Angeles City now that for the first time there's a mayoral race in an even numbered year. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, and that of course was the impetus for that change, right? It really was based on a state law that looked at those local contests and the history of those elections, and found that the turnout in those elections was extremely low, and basically challenged those cities and districts that either to demonstrate a higher turnout in those independent election cycles or forced them into the consolidated election cycle. It is interesting for an even year, and we've talked about this before, Rafe, that this is a gubernatorial election year, so we don't have a presidential contest. The gubernatorial contest is not particularly competitive in this election cycle, nor actually is the United States Senate race. So it's interesting that really what's driving the interest from my perspective, or what I've seen in the community in this particular election, are local contests. It is the open mayor's race in the city of LA, the race for county supervisor in the third supervisorial district, and the race for county sheriff are really kind of the higher profile contests in this election. So it is a bit unusual in that sense.
Well, that's a good political science point you're making there, Dean, which is that we thought this was going to raise local turnout because the state would carry it along. And it may be the opposite. It may be the local that's
very well
carrying
could be.
this election along. Very interesting. Now let's get down into some details. Who's allowed to vote in LA County? What are the requirements to be a registered voter?
Yeah, the requirements to be a registered voter are pretty basic. You have to be at least 18 years of age or older. You have to be a citizen of the United States. You have to be a resident of the state of California and a resident of the county that you're registering in. And the only other thing that would prohibit you from being registered is if you were under a felony conviction and currently incarcerated in a state penitentiary. So pretty rare, and that's been a change in recent years. Actually, a change generated by a voter adopted proposition that expanded the rights for those who have been involved with our justice system. But really, it is pretty basic to be registered. As long as you're a resident, 18 years old, and a citizen of the United States, you have that equal right to be a registered voter and to participate in our elections.
Now, you'll know this is a hypothetical. I'm going to turn 18 tomorrow. We're like less than a week out from the election. What are my options? I would like to be able to vote.
Yeah, I actually love this question because it kind of falls into your point about political science or civics lessons. So the first thing I would say is hopefully, if you were turning 18 today, that you had the opportunity to pre-register to vote at some point in California, because California allows 16 and 17-year-olds to pre-register to vote, so they automatically become an eligible voter on their 18th birthday. However, if you were in that scenario and you had not pre-registered, it's not too late to register for this election. California also allows for conditional voter registration or same-day voter registration at all of our voting sites leading up to and even on election day. Even next Tuesday, you could walk into a vote center in LA County, fill out the voter registration application. You would get a regular ballot. That ballot would be handled separately because we just have to wait until we get the registration back, get it into the statewide system, confirm that you're not registered elsewhere in the county or in the state. But as soon as that's done, your ballot would be counted as a regular ballot in the election.
Now, I'm turning 18 tomorrow, and I appreciate your good wishes on my birthday, but I've only lived in California for a week. Is there a minimum requirement for how long I have to have lived in California?
There is not a strict length of residency requirement for voter registration in California. So if you
So
turn 18
once you're
tomorrow,
established as a
yep,
resident, you are okay.
correct.
And they now call it a conditional ballot, which means that what? What is a conditional ballot?
Really, all conditional means is that that we need to get your information into the state database, run it through. We ask at the time of voter registration, we ask for your California DMV or state ID number. If you don't have that, we ask for the last 4 digits of your social security number. That just enables us to do a confirmation that you are who you say you are and that you are an eligible elector. Once that's done, then your ballot would be open, separated from your identity, and counted with all the other ballots in the election.
Now, as I recall, that used to be called the provisional ballot. There must be a reason that we stopped calling them provisionals and now we call them conditional.
Yeah, the key distinction there is provisional. Provisional ballots still exist to a certain extent. They're very rare. They're not needed anymore because of the same-day registration law as much. But what provisional ballots are is they're sort of that fail-safe method that says that anybody who shows up to vote at a voting location in California, we're not going to turn them away. If they're not listed in the roster, or if there's some issue, for instance, maybe it says that they've already cast a ballot, that they turned in a ballot and they insist that they haven't, we would not turn them away. We would have them vote a provisional ballot. Then we would research that to find out if they were eligible, and if so, if that was a valid ballot in the election. The distinction with conditional registration is that's somebody who's not yet a registered voter, so they're registering to vote, and it's only conditioned on that that verification of, through the statewide database. So it really is just a timing issue of our ability to get the data into the system, get confirmation back from the statewide database, and then we're able to count the ballot.
How will I find out if my conditional ballot has been accepted?
You can track that. Actually, any voter in California can track their voting experience, whether you vote by mail or vote in person. You can track that and get a push notification either by text or email confirming that your ballot has been counted. You can also confirm your voter registration at any time by going to our website at lavote.gov, put in some basic information, and it'll confirm that we have you as an active registered voter. And in the case of a conditional registration, as soon as you confirm that active registration, that is also an indication that your ballot has been processed and counted.
That's great. So how are things looking at the polling centers? I mean, there's been a lot of talk about election workers feeling uncomfortable doing the volunteer work that's so important to the system. Are you running short of people? Do you need more people? How's it going? How's morale, et cetera, out there at the polls?
Yeah, appreciate that question. It's a very interesting time. We have an interesting narrative going on across the country around the security and the integrity of elections. There's still a lot of mis and disinformation out there. There's still a lot of chatter and noise, what I would term noise, about the 2020 election cycle, although there are a number of independent studies and results of court cases that show that was in fact a very secure election, and that demonstrate the validity of those results. But in some of the swing states where they're very competitive contests for statewide offices, for governor, for targeted contests that may determine the political control of the U.S. House of Representatives or the U.S. Senate, you're seeing this kind of thread of a political nature of elections administration where we're sort of in advance of the election. They're saying, well, if it doesn't go our way, then there must have been something wrong with the administration of the election. Fortunately, in California, we have not been completely immune to that, but we have really solid election laws in California, and we have a very transparent process. So we aren't seeing as significant impacts of that here in California or in Los Angeles County. We're also fortunate in Los Angeles County that our Board of Supervisors has committed the resources of county employees from all county departments to work as election workers. So we have a combination of community election workers and county employees who work at our vote centers. So right now, our staffing levels look good. We have not seen a drop off of people willing to work the election. I was out last weekend, visited some vote centers on the first day of opening, and was really impressed with the not just the attendance and attention to detail of the election workers, but their enthusiasm and their interest for ensuring the accessibility and integrity of the process, which is really how it's all designed, right? This is a community process that belongs to the voters of LA County. We're here to facilitate it, but the process belongs to the voters.
I was once a volunteer at a polling place, and I just loved it. Coffee and donuts and good conversation and people in a good mood when they came to vote. It's really a great experience. So I'm glad people are feeling pretty good, even in these hard times. So when you're at the polls, no one is allowed to come in an election year near the poll. What are the rules on that?
Right. So voting locations are intended to be and regulated to be a politically neutral zone, right? So when you come in to vote, we want you to have the comfort and the confidence that you can vote as you choose to for whatever candidates, however you want to vote on the measures, whatever party, however you want to do that. So state law does prohibit electioneering within the vote center, as well as within 100 feet of the entrance of that vote center. So it's not a place where you should wear a campaign button, a hat, or a campaign t-shirt. If you're out canvassing, that's appropriate, but not in the vote center or right outside the vote center. And if people show up with those kind of that material, we do ask them to remove it or to come back without that material on. Not usually a big issue, but sometimes people are very enthusiastic about measures or issues, and so it's an important reminder that in that act of voting, it is supposed to be a neutral zone, and that the electioneering should be separate from that.
Great. Let's talk about the ballot itself. You get your ballot in the mail because every voter gets a vote by mail ballot. What percentage of voters do you think are going to submit these based on trends and everything in LA County are going to submit them by mail?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question because every election kind of takes on a profile of its own, and we talked about that already a little bit about this one being a statewide election, but not really being driven by statewide contests. So we typically see higher turnout in the even years, highest turnout in presidential years. This being a non-presidential midterm election, probably not going to see the same type of turnout that we saw in the 2020 election. But we're definitely seeing higher participation already than we saw in the June primary, for example. So we have about 600,000+ vote by mail ballots that have been returned so far, about 13,000 to 14,000 voters who have voted in person at our vote centers since they opened on Saturday. So, that's pushing up, beyond 10% turnout already. It's also trending about 175,000 or so more voters at this same stage as in the primary. So I think that that bodes well for what I would call a significant turnout in this election, not necessarily a record setting turnout. And we always, I always want to be aspirational because we want to have a high turnout. This ballot is full of, it's a very rich ballot and long ballot that includes things that affect people from their neighborhood level all the way up to our representation in Congress, and potentially, as we talked about, the control of the two houses of Congress, leading forward. So hopefully we will see a high rate of participation in this election, and hopefully events like this will encourage participation and kind of the confidence that people have that their voice will be heard and that they should participate in the election.
So I read the other day, and who knows if this is reliable, that it is better to put my vote by mail ballot in a drop box than it is in a U.S. Postal Service box, because it might not get picked up in the second case in time to be postmarked within the time limit. Is that true? Is it wiser if I'm right down to the wire to use a drop box instead of a U.S. Postal Service box?
Yeah, I think I would characterize that slightly different. I think at this stage, we're 6 days before the election. I think today, as we're having this conversation, any of the methods available for returning your vote by mail ballots are reliable and secure methods of doing that. So putting it in, returning it by mail, there's no postage requirement. Putting it in one of our 400 secure drop boxes throughout the county, or walking it into one of our vote centers. Right now, there are 118 of those available in the county, open every day. This weekend, that'll expand. We'll have 640 locations. I think any of those methods is effective, and it really comes down to a personal choice. Where I would make the distinction is if you're going to wait till Tuesday on election day to return your ballot, then yes, I would say you're better off to put that into a vote by mail drop box or drop it at a vote center, simply because that ensures that we receive it by the time the polls close on Tuesday evening. Now, if you do return it through the mail, as you said, as long as it's postmarked on election day and we receive it within 7 days of the election, it will still be valid. And I can tell you that that is still a pretty well-established way for voters to return their ballots. We will receive literally hundreds of thousands of valid ballots in those days following the election day that have to be processed and then will be included in the final returns.
So let's talk about another thing about the ballots. I didn't know if I was seeing double. I opened my ballot and saw U.S. Senator Alex Padilla on there twice. So can you explain to everybody that they're not getting, there's not a misprint in their ballot, and they don't need to return it and ask for a better ballot? There really is a reason he's on there twice.
Yeah, another great civics lesson, because it's a rare occurrence, probably may not happen again in our voting lifetime here in California. But that really is a result of the fact that Kamala Harris was elected vice president in 2020, and of course vacated her seat in the United States Senate as one of California's 2 United States senators. And that was filled by gubernatorial appointments. So Governor Gavin Newsom appointed Alex Padilla to that vacant U.S. Senate seat. But because that is a voter elected position, that it has to be put before the voters at the next available election. So that you're seeing it twice, because the first contest is really to fill out the remainder of Vice President Harris's term in the U.S. Senate, which really is just to the end of this year. But it just so happens that it coincides with an election year that office would have been up for a full 6-year term as well. So the second contest is the election for U.S. Senator for a full 6-year term.
So just to have a little civics fun, if Senator Padilla lost the first election, he'd be out of office until the end of this calendar year. But if he won the second election, he would actually take office for the next 6 years.
That is correct.
This is one reason we get confused in this world when it comes to voting, but now everybody understands it's not a typographical error. Well, let's talk a little bit about how you actually count the votes, because once again, you now live in a world where before the election's even held, they announce the whole thing is fixed, and you haven't even started the election yet. So let's walk through a few process questions. What conditions are the machines in right now? They're over the years, those questions, has the machines been replaced? Have they been updated? What's the quality of our voting machines in the county?
Yeah, I think voters in LA County and truly across the country can have or should have a great deal of confidence in the voting technology that is used to count their ballots. They're first of all, with very few exceptions, and certainly here in LA County and throughout the state of California, the official record of your votes is that paper ballot, that paper human readable ballot. So if there was ever an issue with technology or equipment, those ballots, those physical ballots can be looked at. We can go back and we can conduct an audit. We can do a reconciliation, all of those things. But beyond that, the voting equipment that's used in California is subjected to some of the most stringent voting system requirements in the country. It's independently tested by computer science labs, by information security tests. It goes through penetration testing, volume testing, all of that before we can even use it in an election. Then in the conduct of the election, our staff runs through what are known as logic and accuracy tests, which simply means that we take a bunch of pre-marked ballots, run them through the system with a known and expected result, and validate that those are working properly. We do that before we start running any live ballots in an election, and we actually do it in between every time we do updated election results. So we're constantly validating that the system is functioning as it was intended to function. And there's also a significant level of physical security around our tally center to ensure that as well. And then finally, what I would say is in that post-election canvass period, which is about the 30 days following the election, in California, we are required to conduct a hand count sampling of those ballots, compare them to a random sample, so we don't know, where those ballots are going to come from in advance, and to compare those to the results of our tally system. So that's one more layer of transparency and independence that shows that the system is operating as it is intended to.
So one reason we don't vote online, unless I'm wrong, Dean, is that if we voted online, the opportunities for hacking would be very, very large. Would you say that that's true?
Yeah, I think that the challenge with online voting is that the means that we have to secure that and to demonstrate the integrity of that are linked to having to know the identity of the voter who cast each of the ballots, right? So if you think about it, the scenario of that, we register for courses and register an enrollment in college online, or we do our even do our taxes or our banking online, all of that is subject to being able to audit it back to our identity. So if there was any problem in that, we can go back and correct it, right? So if my deposit ends up in your bank account, we have a way to fix that. With voting, there's a fundamental principle of the secrecy of the ballot. And when you eliminate that link to the identity of who cast that ballot, then you lose the auditability and security that would be necessary to prove the integrity of an online voting system. Now, there's brilliant people out there that I think are continuing to look at this, and that may change in the future. But the general consensus, even amongst computer scientists and information security experts, is that right now, because of that voter secrecy principle, it would not be a secure way to cast ballots in this country.
Okay, so now we go to the next part. Most of the ballots are going to come in by mail. Let's face it, right? This will be the great majority of them. And it goes into a room somewhere. And the big question is literally what happens in those rooms? What is that room like? Who is allowed in there? And what do they do when the ballots come in? This is, I think, because it's mysterious, all sorts of theories that are completely not true float around about, nefarious schemes. What actually occurs when all those ballots come pouring in?
Yeah, so we'd like to make that less mysterious, right? So it's actually, and it's important to note this, that it's actually a very transparent process, that when those ballots come back, the entire process, what we have to do with those, for validating that they came from a legitimate voter, to separating them from the identity of the voter for that voter secrecy principle that we talked about, preparing them to go through the scanners to be tabulated, all of that is open to observation. So it's there, that happens in secure facilities, but each of those facilities has an observation area where political observers or just general voters from the electorate can come and watch that process. We also live stream a lot of that process on our website. It's not the most exciting thing to watch from a streaming video standpoint, but we do it to convey that, right? That we're doing this in full light for the public to see that process. So the first thing that happens is the ballots come back either from the post office or from our teams that are retrieving them from the drop boxes. They go to our vote by mail processing center, which is out in the City of Industry. They are run through a signature verification process where the signature on the affidavit envelope is matched to the signature that we have on record for the voter. That happens for every single one of the ballots. So that is the way we validate that the ballots are coming from registered voters, and that we also validate that they haven't voted already in the election. Once that validation takes place, then then it goes to extraction, where we remove the ballot cards from the envelope. That's where we separate the identity of the voter from the actual ballots themselves. We do a quick physical review of the ballot just to make sure that there isn't any damage, that there's not information that would prevent the tally system from accurately counting that ballot. And then those ballots are sealed into secured boxes and transported to our tally center, which is actually in Downey. Now at the tally center, what we do is we keep a log of those secured ballot boxes. And again, in a very open, transparent manner that can be observed. Those are opened and the ballots are run through our scanning devices. And we're actually doing that now. So the 600,000 vote by mail ballots that we've already received, we're processing those in real time right now. And those are actually, when they're ready, those ballot cards are being scanned through our tally scanners. What we can't do and won't do until 8 o'clock, after 8 o'clock on election day, is we can't run the program that actually looks at the images of those ballots and consolidates those votes into totals, which is the tabulation process. That can't happen until the voting period is over, when the polls close at 8 o'clock on election night. But we have all those ballots scanned in, we have those images ready to go. So at 8 o'clock, we can hit the button, run that program, and that will produce the preliminary results that we will have available kind of in that first hour after the polls close. Then we'll start receiving the ballots that are cast on election day that are coming in from the vote centers throughout the evening, and that's what we'll add to those totals until we have a semi-official result.
So here's a question that was asked from our audience. If you send in your mail-in ballot and change your mind, can you go back to a polling center and re-vote in a different way?
Yeah, no, great question. And the answer to that is no, that you only get to vote once per election as an eligible voter. And once you submit that ballot, so I guess the best way for me to convey that is when you put that ballot in the mail or in a drop box, that's essentially putting it into a ballot box. At that point, you have cast your ballot, and there are no do-overs. So, same thing at a vote center. While you're in the booth, you can change your mind, and change your ballot. But once you hit the cast vote ballot button on the voting device and it goes into the ballot box, there is no way to retrieve that and go back. And again, the main reason for that is because that's a secret ballot. So because we're processing these in real time, we actually could not go back and identify which was your ballot because that has been separated from the identity of the voter.
How do you deal with the fact is, let's say you're looking at a signature and the signature doesn't quite match up, but people's signatures change over time. And this is a question that was asked from the audience. Do you have any recourse there? Will they call you and say, we don't know, there's an inconsistency here? Or will you have any opportunity to fix a problem in your ballot before it's rejected? I guess is my question.
Yeah, I actually love this question because I think it's another layer of the process that I think a lot of people don't realize that is even available. But yes, exactly what you said is the case, that when we check those signatures, if a signature doesn't match, or if we receive a ballot and the voter forgot to sign the ballot, so it's a blank ballot, then we actually reach out to the voter. We send a letter. If we have email information or a phone number, we reach out to the voter, and there is an opportunity for the voter to cure that by submitting a certification of their signature, or if they didn't sign in the first place, a signed affidavit. And those are processed throughout the post-election canvass period. So I will tell you right now, so of those 600,000 vote by mail ballots that we've received back, there are about 4,800 that fall into that category, that either the signature is under review or they were unsigned, and we're reaching out to those voters, and every day we receive a handful of those that are cured, and those then are able to be processed during the canvass.
So there's an advantage when you register to vote to make sure there's contact information just in case something like this were ever to occur, right?
Absolutely. And again, if you use our ballot tracking system or the statewide ballot track system, you would also get a notification through there. The other thing that I think is a good place maybe to remind people that because you're right, signature consistency is not what it maybe was years ago, because people are used to using computers. We don't have that muscle memory in our hands anymore. But a good way for you to think about that is most of our voter registration today in California comes through our DMV transactions. So a good way to think about it is when you sign that ballot, your signature should be pretty close to the way you signed your driver's license, because that's going to be the registration signature that we're going to look at to compare when we receive that ballot.
So, Dean, is there any difference between the treatment of a pre-filled out ballot versus a ballot that you fill out? I presume that means you went online and figured out and just handed it in when you went to the polling place. Is that handled any differently than one where you go into the booth?
No, well, there really is no, I want to be careful on that because there's really no pre-filled ballot. I mean, so you can't go obtain a ballot that's already filled out. There are options for accessibility where you could go online and use what we call our remote accessible vote by mail system to mark a ballot using your computer, then print that out and mail it in.
Right.
Likewise, when you're at the vote center, you're using a ballot marking device where you're making your selections, and then that prints out on a physical ballot. But that physical ballot in any of those scenarios, that physical ballot is the ballot that gets actually counted for election results. So there is no electronic transfer of any of that data. The votes are detected by scanning in that physical ballot and tabulating the results.
Dean, some voters worry that it's like a school assignment and you have to fill out an answer to all the questions or you failed. You're going to look at your ballot, you're going to see judges, and unless you've done some research, who knows what you're going to do. You may not vote on all the propositions. So can you reassure us that you can vote for as many or few things on the ballot as you want?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And this is a long ballot, as we talked about, that ranges from local contests, those state measures. In the judicial contest, there's actually two types of judicial contests. There's contests where you're voting for candidates for judge, and then there are your statewide judges that are what we call retention elections, where you're saying yes or no whether or not to retain the current judge who's sitting in those seats. Now, those are important because those are elected positions. And I think, again, from a civic standpoint, it's important to know that this is a key element of our representative form of government. But to your point, it is not a requirement that you vote in every contest. If you only vote in one contest and turn in those ballots, that vote in that contest is going to count. The rest are just going to register as undervotes in those contests. Now, in the active voting, at a vote center, the device is going to let you know before you cast your ballot that you have remaining choices. But you as a voter can decide to override that and say, no, I've completed as much of the ballot as I want to complete, and at that.
Do you expect a lot of drop off going farther down the ballot based on your experience? It is a long ballot this time. Is there a pretty big drop off when you go past? I forgot, this time, will the city elections be at the top, or are they going to be farther down? I know there's been some debate about that.
Yeah, no, and that's something very unique to Los Angeles County, actually, is that we are currently in a 2-election cycle pilot project that was passed by the legislature, where in LA County, and we are the only county in the state right now that's doing this, the ballot order is flipped. So the local contests are listed at the top of the ballot, and then the federal contests are listed at the end of the ballot. And it's all based on a belief that touches on exactly what you've asked, because historically we've seen a drop off towards the end of the ballot where local contests, even when they're consolidated in an even year, they just don't get the same number or same rate of participation that the statewide or federal contests have. So this pilot is designed to see if that makes a difference. If we start the ballot with those very localized contests, do we see less of a drop off between those and the federal contests? I can tell you in our preliminary analysis, because this is the second election cycle that we've done this, not scientific data by any means, but the theory is proven out, right? That we are seeing a higher rate of participation in those local contests when they appear first on the ballot. So after this election is over, we'll actually be doing a comprehensive study of that pilot and making a decision whether or not to continue to do that going forward. But again, preliminary analysis looks like that does make a difference.
And in this case, ironically, where we started, that was originally done to protect city elections from getting wiped out by the tremendous interest in state elections. And now, of course, we have the reverse, where the city elections may be the hottest thing on the ballot compared to the state elections.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
I wanted to go back to one question because the questioner wanted to make sure I asked it correctly. So the question goes like this: if I fill out my ballot today and drop it at the voting center, do they put that ballot in the ballot box with those that have been voted by machine, or do they segregate them so that they can verify the one that was walked in? Or is that really not a problem at all because it's all?
No, I mean, it's so if you drop your ballot off today at a vote center, it's going to be treated the same as the ballots that are cast at that vote center. So at the end of the day, when that vote center closes this evening at 7 o'clock, your ballot, as well as the ballots that were cast at the vote center, would be secured in a ballot box, transported back to our office, and processed. The only difference would be that the vote by mail ballot would go to our vote by mail processing center for signature verification, extraction, everything that I described before. But it would be scanned in and it would be included in the election night results that come out shortly after 8 o'clock.
We have about 4 or 5 minutes left, and I have a couple of things I really want to ask you about. But one quick one was just a reminder: if you're not registered to vote and you show up at a voting center to register for the first time, what documents do you need to have with you to verify your eligibility to vote?
Yeah, I mean, there's really no requirement for you to have any documentation to register to vote. The voter registration is based on a attestation under penalty of perjury that you declare that you meet the qualifications, that you are over the age of 18, that you are a citizen of the United States, and that the address you've provided is your residence address. Again, we do ask for, on the application, we ask for your California ID number, whether your DMV, your driver's license, or state ID number. If you don't have a California ID, then we would ask for the last 4 digits of your social security number. But you don't have to produce a social security card or produce a driver's license in order to do that.
My last question has to do with election night, and I have a vested interest because I'm going to be sitting with popcorn in front of the TV set waiting for your results to come in. And it's going to drive me nuts. So you're saying that at 8 o'clock, you can tabulate what's been received, or that you've tabulated it and you can release those right after 8 o'clock, those first returns?
Yeah, so at 8 o'clock, once the polls have closed, all of the ballots that have been processed and scanned in, which would be all of the vote by mail ballots that were received up through this weekend, as well as the early voting that has taken place at our vote centers. Those ballots come back in every night and they're processed. Those will all be ready for tabulation. So as soon as the polls close at 8 o'clock, we can run that program. Now, it is, because it's such a long ballot, that process will take a little longer than we've seen in the past. So I would say within that first hour, I want to give us a little bit of a cushion. Within that first hour, we'll release those results. The great thing about those results, I'll talk about the great thing first. The great thing is that that will be a representative sample of the entire county of Los Angeles. So it won't just be those places that are physically close to the tally center. It will be a full sampling of the county in all contested measures. Then after that, what will happen on election night is the votes that are cast at our vote centers on election day, up until the closing of the polls at 8 o'clock, those all have to be transported back to the tally center. And as those are received, we'll process those and we will update the results throughout the evening. That's what will take place on election night. So late Tuesday night or early Wednesday morning, you'll have what we call a semi-official result, which will be all of the election day ballots and all of those early ballots that came in through the mail through the weekend. Now, what's important to know, though, is that if there are close contests, which recent history has shown is more common, any contest where there's a close margin between the two candidates is likely going to hang in the balance potentially for weeks after the election, because California election laws favor participation. So those ballots that are postmarked on election day, those ballots that are turned in at drop boxes on election day, they all have to come back and go through that processing that we talked about. And that, that takes a period of time to make sure that it's done with the full integrity and security of the process. So we will update election results next Friday after election day, and then twice a week, every day during the 30-day canvass period. But we actually won't certify the results of the election until Monday, December 5th. That's when we're scheduled to certify here in Los Angeles County. Statewide, the Secretary of State doesn't certify the election until December 16th. So there is a long period in California where ballots are still being processed, and that can be frustrating for candidates, for the media, or academics like yourself. But what I always like to emphasize is that really is, that's what may not seem intuitive, but that's sort of with intention in California. And the intention is to be sure that every valid vote is included in that final count.
Dean, I want to thank you for your time. I'm going to let you go in just a moment for our next guest. But as always, the fact that you participate in all these events, not just with us, but with everybody else, I think you really do a wonderful job of keeping the public engaged. And just hurry on election night. Get as many of those out as you can so that I don't lose my mind waiting for the results to come in. But you can't just do that for me.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Rafe, and thanks for the partnership with the Pat Brown Institute. The work that you do through social media and through the programs at the Institute to promote voting and to kind of discount mis and disinformation. It's really important. It's an important partnership, especially in a county this large. So always a pleasure to work with you.
Thank you, Dean. Take care. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Well, everybody, I would like to introduce our next very special guest, Dr. Ninotchka McTaggart, who is the executive director of the Los Angeles League of Women Voters. And, we're all on a first name basis. So Ninotchka, it's wonderful to see you again.
Nice
And
to
we
see
always
you.
enjoy working with you and the league on all of your programs. Can you mind if I just ask you a few questions?
Yes, go for it.
Okay. So very quickly, where did you come from? How did you end up at the League of Women Voters? Let's just start with that and mention Cal State LA because I know it's in there somewhere.
Yes. So I am a native Angelino. I grew up in Northeast Los Angeles in the Mount Washington area. I went to college at USC, and then I got my master's at Cal State LA, got my PhD at UCR in sociology. So I come from an academic background. I study race, gender, and social inequality specifically. How I got to the league is I actually came from the Gina Davis Institute on Gender and Media. So looking at representation in media. And like I always say, my personal philosophy is representation matters. So although I'm coming from a media background, I've always been politically engaged, and I really feel like representation matters also in civic engagement. And that's why this role is so great, and I take so much joy in doing it because I'm able to fight for people to be represented equitably in the political process.
Well, it's been great to work with you in our programs. We love having you as a partner. And the League of Women Voters has been around for more than, 100 years now?
Yes,
It seems to be, as it always does, it seems to be evolving in our contemporary world. So what have you seen about the League and its kind of newer and evolving role in the community, especially here in LA?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, we've been around for over 102 years now, both nationally and also in the city of Los Angeles. As far as some of the events that we do locally, we have candidate forums. I know we have also partnered with PBI to do some candidate forums to get out for folks to be able to see what their candidates' platforms are, answer those important questions on issues that matter. We also do get out the vote events. So you'll see us tabling. We've been at Cal State LA doing tabling. We get out there and we talk about the propositions. So we actually have what we call pro-con presentations where we present nonpartisan information about the propositions. I know you've been probably bombarded by ads and mailers. So this is a way for us to give you nonpartisan, accurate information about who's funding the propositions, what the proposition means in more language that's accessible. Because I know if you've ever read a proposition, right, it's really long, really wordy, and very confusing at times. So we're trying to get that information out there so the public can get it in a more palpable way. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you've been on our campus tabling, and there's quite a few of our students on this call right now on this webinar. What's your impression? What kind of conversations do you have with students? What do they ask you? What do they seem to be looking for? How are you able to help? What sense are you picking up in the conversations here?
Yeah, with tabling, especially with younger voters who we really want to engage in the political process, I think a lot of younger voters feel like maybe their vote doesn't matter, or, if I, why should I even be voting? And my answer to that is your vote does matter, especially like Dean was talking about earlier, especially with local elections, right? Whether something passes or not, or whether someone is elected really comes down to could be hundreds or thousands of votes. So if people say, you know what, I'm just going to sit this one out, it can really, really, really make a difference if those folks are, exercising their right to vote. So I would say your vote does matter, and it's really important because, as our founding as the league, we came about when, the 19th Amendment passed and women didn't have the right to vote. So by voting, we're able to make social change. You're able to vote on the issues that are important to you and vote on the candidates you believe will best represent the issues that really matter to you and your community.
So when you're making the same argument also in communities that have been marginalized for so many decades, and this goes back to your own academic work and your own life experience, people often feel like it's a circle. They feel hopeless about participating, and then by not participating, they're not actually at the table. How do you break the circle for people to feel empowered through voting? And what do you do to make your best case?
Well, I think that, we have, progress is made when people fight for what they believe in. They fight to make things more inclusive. And I think by voting, it's one of, it's a way to voice your what you want out of society and who you want included in the process. So I think our work in the league and my work just generally and my background is making the voting process more inclusive so that folks are able to feel like they have a voice and they are empowered. And so that's why voting is important. We really want to see, it really comes down to who do you want to see up there representing you, right? That's why I'm always up for giving voter education and also inclusion of people who are normally marginalized in other aspects of society.
What about Voters Edge? How has that been a successful thing that the league does? And are there ways that the people on the call could take advantage of that? Like me, I look at half the propositions and I read a lot of stuff and I still don't understand a lot of it. How does Voters Edge help us?
So I'm glad that you mentioned Voters Edge. It's a wonderful resource. Again, it's nonpartisan. So we never specifically endorse or oppose candidates at the league. We just want to get accurate information out there. So it's votersedge.org. I think Randy is putting that in the chat now. And what's really cool about it is you can put your address, or if you're not comfortable doing that, you can put your zip code in and actually see what your ballot will look like. There's a tool on there where you can compare candidates, you can save your choices. So as you're filling in, let's say, your ballot and you're going to mail it out, you can, kind of take notes that way. And also there's a lot of really in-depth information on the propositions. And I know at the league, we've gotten a lot of questions about just how confusing it is for some people to just get through all that language. So I think that especially is a really, really important resource people can use as far as just getting through the propositions and what exactly they entail.
Well, that's great. Now, Ninotchka, we're in a very partisan time right now where you sometimes have different views of reality depending on, and here you are, a nonpartisan organization. You sometimes find that people say, yeah, you're nonpartisan, but whatever. How do you navigate a partisan world with a nonpartisan organization?
Well, I think what it boils down to, and referring back to what Dean was discussing before, we're really interested in combating misinformation and disinformation.
Mm-hmm.
And by providing nonpartisan information, we're allowing the voters to make their own choice, right? So our main goal is to get the education out there, make it accessible so everyone can make their own choice and everyone can vote. What is most important is that everyone, or as many people as possible, get involved in the political process. So that's really what it's going for. And getting back to your question about being nonpartisan in a partisan world, I think at the very crux of the political process is just having that accurate, non-biased information for folks to, use that and go from there.
So I want to go back to you when you first, even before you came to the league. What first got you to think about voting in your own life? What brought you to the polls? And I presume, like me, you never left, because once I started voting, I was never not going to vote. But do you remember how you felt and what it meant to you?
Yeah, I mean, it felt great. I think I'm trying to remember back to the first time I voted, and it did feel great. I felt really important. I felt, it was an exciting process. And like you said, I kind of just kept going with it. And what brought me to it is my parents are Jamaican immigrants. I'm a first-generation college student. And, they came from a country where the political process was not always, it included violence and corruption and things like that. So coming here and being able to vote was really an important right that I wanted to exercise, given the background that I had from my family. So that's why, I mean, personally, it was really important for me to get involved in whatever ways I could.
I think that story is going to resonate with a lot of people on the call. And what the significance of it is, I still carry, this is from 2 years ago when I voted. So this is getting kind of old and creepy. So I'm going to have to vote in the next couple of days and put a fresh one on there so I can carry it around for 2 weeks. I think it's one of these things that really can save our democracy, is one vote at a time, to do it all together.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, if we look historically at the progress we've made, it happened at one vote at a time, or a group of people coming together. So, you know, in the short run, maybe it's not as visible, but in the long run, we see how social movements go and how really change can happen over time. And so that's exactly why it's important for everyone to vote on this call, and also for young voters to get involved and know that there's other ways to get involved other than voting too, right? You can just inform your family and friends about getting out the vote, or encouraging people to vote, or, hey, I'll give you a ride to the polls with me, you know? So there's ways to do it, you know, outside of voting, and civic engagement should be something that we do, you know, not just during election time, right? Just all year round.
So what are you going to be doing the next few days as the League of Women Voters, and yourself? How are you going to spend your time?
Well, we will be giving presentations on the propositions. We have a few coming up. We have tabling events that we're still doing this weekend. Also answering lots of emails and phone calls at the office. A lot of folks just need information, so we'll be referring them to Dean's office and getting them the information they need to, you know, be able to vote.
Well, Ninotchka, thank you for joining us, but even more so, thank you for all the work that you and the League are doing. It's really invaluable.
Well, thank you for having me today. It's been great.
Well, everyone, as we close, I want to thank all of us who participated, all of you who listened in and sent questions, and those of you who just were learning from this event. I want to thank the staff of the Registrar's Office, the staff at the League of Women Voters, the staff at the Pat Brown Institute for everything. And a reminder that Tuesday, June 8th is election day, but it's going to be quite a while before we need to know the results, and we're all going to be very patient in the weeks going forward. But the bottom line is, if you can vote, vote. If you can't vote, get somebody else to vote. But in general, we're all going to be a voting community. And enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you for being with us.